Picture a factory floor in Orange, New Jersey, 1917. Rows of young women, some barely out of school, sit hunched over tiny watch dials, painting delicate numbers with a fine camel hair brush. The paint glows a soft, ghostly green in the dark. It is beautiful. It is fashionable. Young women wear it on their lips and fingernails for a laugh on their way home, glowing like something out of a fairy tale. The paint is called Undark. Its glow comes from radium. Nobody has told these women that radium is a bone-seeking poison that will kill some of them slowly, agonizingly, from the inside out. The work itself seems almost genteel compared to the grim factory labor of the era. These are dial painters, and the job is considered a plum position. Clean hands, decent wages, respectable company. The technique they are taught is called lip, dip, paint. Dip the brush in radium paint, twirl it to a fine point between your lips, paint the dial, repeat, hundreds of times a day. The company knows radium is dangerous. Scientists and executives handling the material elsewhere use lead aprons, protective screens, tongs, but on the factory floor, the young women are told there is nothing to fear. Some are even told the paint will put roses in their cheeks, that it's practically a tonic. Radium behaves chemically like calcium. Once ingested, and these women are ingesting it brush by brush, day after day, the body mistakes it for calcium and deposits it directly into the bones, and once it's in the bone, it never really leaves. It sits there, irradiating the surrounding tissue from the inside for years. The first sign of trouble is the jaw. Dial painters begin visiting dentists with mysterious tooth pain. The dentists pull the offending teeth and the sockets don't heal. Instead, the jawbone itself begins to rot, disintegrating, sometimes crumbling away in the dentist's hand. Doctors coin a grim nickname for the condition, radium jaw. Women lose teeth, then portions of their jawbone, then, in the most horrific cases, their entire lower face collapses. Others develop bizarre bone tumors, anemia, spontaneous fractures from bones so brittle they snap while simply walking. Some of the women, in a detail that still chills historians today, become so radioactive that their bones glow faintly when examined in a darkened room, years after they've stopped working. The company's response, for years, is denial, obfuscation, and blame. Executives insist the women's ailments must be caused by something else entirely: poor hygiene, other illnesses, anything but the paint. Company doctors, some later revealed to have been feeding false diagnoses to the women while reporting radium poisoning privately to management, tell dying women they are perfectly healthy. It takes extraordinary courage for anyone to fight back. A small group of women, several of them now horrifically ill, begin building a legal case. No small task in an era when workers, especially women, had essentially no established right to sue an employer for industrial illness. One of the most determined, Grace Fryer, spends 2 years simply trying to find a lawyer willing to take the case against a powerful corporation. She eventually finds one. In 1927, the case goes to court, and it becomes a sensation. Reporters dub the plaintiffs the Radium Girls, and the press coverage of visibly dying young women, some unable to raise their arms to be sworn in, turns public opinion overwhelmingly against the company. The case is eventually settled out of court in 1928, a modest sum for each woman, medical expenses covered, a small pension. It is nowhere near justice for what they suffered. Several of the women die within a year or two of the settlement. But the case establishes, for the first time in American law, that companies can be held liable for occupational disease, not just accidents, but slow poisoning inflicted through daily work. The scientific fallout is just as important. The Radium Girls cases and the detailed medical data gathered from their suffering become the foundation of modern radiation safety standards. A physicist named Robley Evans, who studied the surviving women for decades, uses their case histories to help establish the first safe tolerance limits for internal radiation exposure, limits still referenced in radiation protection science today. It is a bitter irony worth sitting with. The safety standards that protect nuclear workers, medical technicians, and scientists today exist largely because a group of young women were poisoned by an industry that knew the risks and said nothing, and because those women, dying, chose to fight anyway.